Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination. What happens when Hollywood tough guy Mark Wahlberg sits across the table from Joy Behar on The View, and the topic isn't movies, fame, or fitness, but something far more personal and painful: the crushing cost of prescription drugs in America? At first, it looks like another spirited daytime debate. Joy Behar cracks a few jokes, Mark smiles politely, and the panel settles in. But the second the question lands, should prescription drug prices be capped by law, the energy in the studio shifts. Joy insists government price caps would ruin innovation. Mark fires back that ordinary Americans are already ruined. Families bankrupt, seniors forced to choose between groceries and medicine, parents splitting pills to stretch a prescription that should last weeks. His voice shakes with anger, but it's not performance, it's personal. The audience leans forward. Social media lights up. Joy tries to pivot, but Mark refuses to let go. Every time she defends the pharmaceutical industry, he slams her arguments with raw, unfiltered truth. By the time the shouting match hits its peak, Mark Wahlberg does something no one in the history of The View has ever done. He gets up, looks Joy straight in the eye, and walks off the set in fury, leaving the panel stunned, the audience roaring, and the internet on fire. This wasn't just Hollywood versus politics. It was one man standing up for millions of Americans too broken by the system to speak. The cameras panned across the bright studio of The View as the audience clapped enthusiastically. The atmosphere was light, cheerful, and filled with the usual daytime energy. Joy Behar adjusted her glasses, gave her trademark smirk, and welcomed the day's special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us today is a man you know from some of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters: Transformers, The Departed, Ted, he's done it all. Please welcome the one and only Mark Wahlberg. The audience erupted in applause as Mark strode onto the stage in his casual but confident style, a dark-fitted jacket over a plain t-shirt, a gold chain peeking just slightly. He smiled warmly, waved to the crowd, and hugged a few of the hosts, including Joy, who gave him a playful pat on the arm. "Good to see you, Joy," Mark said with an easy grin. "Well, Mark, I was just saying in the green room, you look exactly the same as you did 20 years ago. Some of us," she gestured to herself dramatically, "are fighting the good fight with Botox while you just roll out of bed looking like a Calvin Klein ad." The audience laughed and Mark chuckled politely. "Trust me, Joy, I don't just roll out of bed looking like this. I'm up at 4 a.m. every day. Workout, prayer, cold plunge. It's all about discipline." Joy rolled her eyes teasingly. "Oh, please. My discipline is getting to the set on time and remembering my coffee order. That's it." The table shared a laugh, and for a few minutes it felt like classic View banter. Lighthearted, filled with jokes, a movie star sparring playfully with a daytime TV icon. But then Whoopi Goldberg, the moderator, leaned in to steer the conversation toward the hot topic of the day. "All right, let's talk about something that's been on everyone's mind: prescription drug prices. Seniors, families, people across America are struggling. The question is, should the U.S. government step in and cap prescription drug prices by law?" Joy, I know you've got strong feelings on this one. Joy straightened in her chair, her tone shifting slightly. "Yes, Whoopi. Look, it sounds nice, it really does. Everyone wants lower drug prices. But when you cap them by law, you take away the incentive for pharmaceutical companies to innovate. No new cures, no new treatments. You stifle progress. And in the end, patients lose. It's simple economics." The audience gave a polite, subdued applause. Joy glanced at Mark, expecting him to nod along or at least acknowledge the logic. But Mark's jaw tightened, and his smile faded ever so slightly. "Well, I get what you're saying," he replied slowly, measured. "But Joy, with all due respect, That's not the full story. Joy raised her eyebrow. Oh, enlighten me, Professor Wahlberg. The audience chuckled at her sarcasm, but Mark leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his tone calm but firm. I grew up in a family where money was always tight. I know what it's like to watch people struggle. And today I've got friends, I've got family members, regular, hardworking people who can't afford their medicine. Not because there's no innovation, but because the prices are jacked up so high. It's basically legalized robbery. The room grew quieter, the laughter fading into an attentive hush. Mark wasn't joking anymore. Joy waved her hand dismissively. But Mark, you can't just... Mark held up a hand gently. Let me finish, Joy. I'm not saying pharmaceutical companies shouldn't make a profit, but let's be honest, they're already making billions. And while they're doing that, you've got seniors cutting pills in half to stretch out prescriptions. You've got families going into debt because their kid needs insulin. That's not innovation, that's exploitation. The audience burst into applause, some even standing. Joy pursed her lips, trying to mask the irritation flickering in her eyes. "Well, you sound very noble, Mark, and I'm sure your fan club loves hearing it," she said dryly. "But there's more at stake here than sob stories. The economy runs on incentives. If you punish companies for being successful, you won't get the miracle drugs of tomorrow. That's the reality." Mark sat back slightly, but his eyes never left hers. He gave a small, tight smile. "You know, Joy, sometimes the reality you're talking about looks a whole lot like an excuse to keep a broken system in place." The tension at the table was undeniable now. The polite banter had shifted into something heavier, more pointed. Joy was still smiling, but it was thinner, sharper. Mark remained calm, but his intensity was growing. The audience could feel it. The collision course had been set. As the show cut to its first commercial break, the camera zoomed out, capturing the polite smiles, the small laughs, the appearance of civility. But anyone watching closely could see it. Beneath the politeness, beneath the charm, a storm was already building. This was no longer a friendly Hollywood guest spot. This was the start of a fight about dignity, survival, and the price of being human in America. And it was only the beginning. When the show returned from commercial break, the studio looked the same: bright lights, cheerful colors, the clapping audience. But the energy was different. Everyone could feel it. Mark Wahlberg sat upright, his arms folded in front of him, eyes steady. Joy Behar shuffled her note cards and forced a smile, but her jaw was tight. Whoopi tried to ease the tension. "So, we left off talking about prescription drug prices. Joy believes government caps would hurt innovation. Mark feels families are being crushed under unfair costs. Let's open this up." Sunny Hostin jumped in, her lawyer's precision cutting through. "Joy, Mark has a point. Insulin, for example, a drug that's been around for decades, costs hundreds of dollars a month in the U.S., while it's a fraction of that in other countries. That's not innovation, that's price gouging." The audience applauded, but Joy leaned forward, her finger raised. Joy, I hear you, but you're comparing apples and oranges. Other countries have socialized systems. We don't. That's why we have the best hospitals, the best treatments, the best research. People fly here from around the world to get medical care. You start capping prices, you destroy that edge. And yes, it will mean fewer options, fewer cures. Mark uncrossed his arms and leaned into the table. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Joy, I gotta stop you there. People aren't flying here for a broken leg or insulin. They're flying here for specialized surgeries because they're rich enough to afford it. That's not the system working. That's privilege. Meanwhile, the average American is drowning." Joy's smirk hardened. "Oh, so now it's all about privilege. Mark, you're a multimillionaire. You've got more money than this table combined. Don't sit there and lecture me about struggling families." The audience gasped. A ripple of "ooh" swept through the studio. Mark's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, his Boston accent cut sharper through his words. "You're right, Joy. I've been blessed. I worked hard, I made money. But that doesn't mean I forgot where I came from. My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I've seen people choose between paying rent and buying medicine, so don't tell me I don't get it." The applause thundered through the room. Even Sarah Haynes looked stunned, her hand resting on her chest. Joy gave a tight laugh, almost mocking. "It's a nice story, Mark, really. You play the tough Boston kid who made it big and now wants to play Robin Hood. But policy isn't about emotions. It's about economics. If you scare off Big Pharma with government overreach, the stock market crashes, jobs disappear, and yes, your miracle cancer drug never gets invented. People die waiting." Mark leaned back slightly, his hand on the table, steady and controlled. "Joy, and people are dying now, Joy. Right now, today. Seniors are rationing meds. Diabetics are crowdfunding insulin online. Parents are skipping doses so their kids can have more. You talk about some hypothetical miracle drug. Well, what about the real lives being lost today because companies are squeezing every penny out of the sick and vulnerable?" The audience roared with applause. Some even shouted, "That's right!" Joy's face flushed and her voice grew sharper. "You think it's that simple? That you can just wave a law around and fix everything? Life doesn't work like a feel-good Hollywood script. And maybe that's the problem, Joy. Maybe you've been in these seats so long, arguing theory, that you've forgotten the human side. This isn't a script, it's real people. And if standing up for them makes me sound emotional, then so be it." For a beat, the table fell silent. Even Whoopi didn't cut in. The camera zoomed on Joy's clenched jaw, then on Mark's unflinching stare. Joy finally broke the silence, her tone biting. "Well, Mark, if you want socialism, maybe you should move to Canada." Gasps filled the studio again. A few boos even trickled in from the audience. Mark didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a firm, resonant tone. "This isn't about socialism, Joy. It's about decency. It's about a country deciding that no one should have to bury a loved one because they couldn't afford medicine. If that's controversial to you, then maybe you should ask yourself what side of history you want to be on." The applause was deafening this time. The studio felt electric, the air charged with the weight of the clash. Joy adjusted her papers, her smile thinner than ever. The polite start was over. The gloves were off. This wasn't just a debate about drug prices anymore. It was about values, power, and who truly understood the struggles of everyday Americans. And neither Mark nor Joy looked ready to back down. By the time the cameras returned from the next commercial break, you could cut the tension with a knife. Joy sat stiffly, one hand gripping her coffee mug a little too tightly. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed again, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips, not one of arrogance, but of resolve. Whoopi tried to reset the mood. All right. We're talking about whether prescription drug prices should be capped. Clearly it's an issue that stirs a lot of passion." But the passion didn't wait its turn. Mark leaned forward, his hands pressed together as if in prayer. "I want to tell you guys something I don't talk about much. A few years ago, a guy I grew up with back in Dorchester, a good man, father of 3, he got diagnosed with leukemia. You know what his first question to the doctor was? Not, how long do I have? Not, what treatment do I need? His first question was, how much is this going to cost me?" The studio fell silent. Even Joy didn't interject. Mark's voice grew lower, rougher. He had insurance, but the copays, the experimental treatments, the out-of-network nonsense, it broke him. He ended up selling his house, moving his family into a 2-bedroom apartment. And when his oldest daughter graduated high school, he couldn't even be there for the ceremony. He was in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs, worrying not about dying, but about the bills he was leaving behind. And you know what? He didn't make it. He passed away a year later. and his family's still paying off the debt. Gasps rippled through the audience. You could see women in the crowd wiping their eyes. Even Sunny Hosteen put her hand over her mouth, visibly shaken. Mark locked eyes with Joy. His words hit like hammer strikes. So when you sit there and tell me this is about the stock market or about keeping pharma profits fat enough to inspire innovation, I hear that man's voice. I hear his kids crying at the funeral. And I refuse to believe that's the best we can do in the richest country in the world. The studio erupted in applause, raw, emotional, not the polite clapping of earlier. People were on their feet. Joy sat frozen for a moment, blinking hard. She adjusted her papers, then finally found her voice. But it was sharper now, defensive. That's a very moving story, Mark, and I feel for your friend's family. I truly do. But policy isn't made from personal anecdotes. It's made from big-picture realities. And the reality is, if you hamstring pharmaceutical companies, fewer drugs get developed. That's not my opinion. That's basic economics. The applause died quickly. The audience wasn't with her this time. Mark's eyes blazed, his tone rising. Basic economics? Joy, you sound like a spreadsheet. Do you even hear yourself? We're not talking about widgets or car parts. We're talking about human beings. Grandparents, kids, moms, dads. You keep talking about some future miracle drug. What about the millions of people right now who can't afford the drugs that already exist? Should they just die waiting for Wall Street to feel generous? Joy snapped back, her voice louder than before. You think I don't care about people? You think I want people to die? How dare you, Mark? I've spent my career fighting for people's rights, standing up for healthcare reform. Don't paint me as some villain who's okay with people suffering. But Mark didn't let up. He leaned closer, his finger tapping the table for emphasis. Then stop defending the indefensible. Stop carrying water for corporations that are making record profits while families bury their loved ones. You say you fight for people's rights? Then fight for their right to live without being bankrupted by medicine. The audience exploded again, the applause shaking the studio walls. Sarah Haynes actually looked misty-eyed, whispering, "Wow," under her breath. Joy's lips pressed into a thin line. Her usual quips and comebacks seemed to falter under the weight of the moment. She tried to recover, but her tone was brittle. You're emotional, Mark. I get it. But emotion doesn't write good law. Facts do. And the fact is, without those profits, there's no incentive for innovation. That's reality, whether you like it or not. Mark shook his head slowly, his voice heavy with conviction. Maybe that's the difference between us, Joy. You call it emotion like it's a weakness. I call it compassion. I call it humanity. And if we can't make laws with those things at the center, then what kind of country are we? The standing ovation that followed was deafening. Audience members were shouting his name, "Mark! Mark!" The energy was electric, unstoppable. And for the first time in the debate, Joy Behar looked rattled. Her grip on the conversation was slipping. The polite sparring of Act 1 was gone. The escalation of Act 2 had peaked. Now, in Act 3, the emotional core had detonated, and the fallout was everywhere. The studio was still buzzing from the ovation Mark had received. The audience was squarely with him, and Joy Behar knew it. Her shoulders stiffened, her smile had disappeared, and she adjusted her earpiece as though searching for control. Hoopy, trying to diffuse the tension, interjected. Okay, clearly this issue touches nerves. Let's all take a breath." But neither Joy nor Mark was willing to exhale. Joy leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Mark, you're not the only one who's seen suffering. Don't act like you're the only person who knows someone who's been crushed by the cost of medicine. I've buried friends too. I've sat with families who've had to make impossible choices. But unlike you, I don't believe the solution is some populist slogan about caps and rights. Life isn't that simple." Mark turned in his chair, visibly incredulous. Populist slogan? That's how you dismiss people's pain? That's how you justify families drowning in debt while CEOs take home $100 million bonuses? Joy, the only thing simple here is this: medicine shouldn't cost a mortgage payment. The audience erupted again, clapping, cheering, some even shouting, "That's right!" Joy slammed her hand against the table, startling even the co-hosts. "You're grandstanding, Mark. You're an actor. You're used to selling lines. But this is real life. You don't get to fix the healthcare system with a monologue and a scowl." Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't back away. He leaned in. "You know what's funny? You keep saying I'm just an actor, but maybe that's why people actually believe me. Because I don't sound like a politician. I don't sound like someone who's been sitting in a studio bubble for 20 years. I sound like someone who's lived it, who's seen it, who refuses to just shrug and say, 'That's reality.'" Gasps. Cheers. Even Ana Navarro's eyebrow shot up as if to say, "Ooh, this is going somewhere dangerous." Joy's face flushed. She pointed at Mark, her voice shaking with anger. "Don't you dare condescend to me. Don't you dare imply I don't care because I sit here in this chair. I've spent decades fighting for issues you didn't even bother to vote on. And now you come here and play the hero, and the audience claps because you know how to tell a story? Spare me." The crowd booed. Actual boos, echoing through the studio. Mark turned to the audience, spread his hands as if to say, "See?" Then he looked back at Joy. His voice dropped lower, steadier, almost cold. "Joy, you can dismiss me all you want, but when you dismiss the idea that people deserve affordable medicine, you're not just dismissing me, you're dismissing them. Every senior, every parent, every cancer patient praying they can afford another week of life. And you wonder why people don't trust voices like yours anymore?" That line landed like a hammer. The audience roared. Half the panel looked frozen in place. Joy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her hand trembled slightly on her mug. Finally, she pushed her chair back with a screech and stood up. "You know what? I don't need to sit here and be insulted by someone who thinks he's the savior of the middle class. I'm done with this circus." Gasps, applause, shouts. The studio went wild as Joy gathered her notes, muttering something under her breath. She stepped away from the table, ignoring Whoopi's "Joy, wait!" and Sonny's stunned "Oh my God!" The cameras followed her as she walked off the stage, the sound of boos and cheers tangled together, filling the air with chaos. Mark sat back in his chair, calm now, almost solemn. He shook his head slowly and said into the microphone, "This isn't about me winning an argument. It's about people out there who are losing their lives. If that's too much for some people to handle, then maybe that says everything." The audience jumped to their feet again, this time louder than before, chanting his name, clapping, whistling. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to restore order, but even she couldn't hide her shock. "Well, folks, we've seen a lot on this table, but I don't think we've ever seen that." The cameras cut to commercial, but the electricity in the room refused to fade. Because in that moment, it wasn't just a debate. It was an eruption, a breaking point that no one watching would ever forget. The View returned from commercial break with an empty chair at the table. Joy Behar's absence was impossible to ignore, the glossy mug she'd abandoned sitting like a symbol of unfinished battle. Whoopi, ever the steady hand, tried to smooth over the chaos. "Well, things got heated, folks. That's what happens when you talk about real issues that affect real lives. But remember, this conversation doesn't stop here." But everyone watching knew the moment had already gone viral. Clips of Joy storming off the set spread across social media like wildfire. Within an hour, hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag Wahlberg versus Behar, hashtag Cap the Cost, and even hashtag Joy Walkoff. Memes popped up of Mark at the table with captions like, "When you speak truth, the truth speaks back." Others mocked Joy with images of empty chairs and the line, "Can't debate if you leave." News outlets replayed the clash on a loop. CNN asked whether Joy had overstepped by dismissing Mark's experiences. Fox News framed Mark as the working-class hero Hollywood doesn't want. MSNBC wondered aloud whether this moment marked a cultural shift in how Americans view drug pricing debates. Everywhere, people were talking about prescription drug prices, many for the first time. Backstage, Mark leaned against the wall, still in his suit, sipping water. He wasn't gloating. If anything, he looked exhausted. His assistant asked if he wanted to release a statement. He shook his head. No statement. This wasn't about me. It was about the people who can't afford insulin, can't afford chemo, can't afford to live. That's the statement. Later that night, Mark posted a short video on Instagram. No glam lighting, no polished script, just him speaking into his phone. "I didn't go on The View to pick a fight. I went on to talk about something that matters to me, and should matter to all of us. If you've got a loved one rationing medicine or choosing between their prescriptions and groceries, you know what I'm talking about. This isn't politics. This is humanity. And I'll keep talking about it whether people walk off the stage or not." The video was shared millions of times. Comments flooded in. "Mark, thank you for saying what so many of us feel. My mom died because she couldn't afford her meds. You're right, it's not politics, it's life." Finally, someone with a platform who isn't afraid to speak the truth. Joy, meanwhile, stayed silent for 2 days. The tabloids speculated she was furious at the producers, at Mark, at the audience. Some outlets claimed she regretted walking off, others insisted she stood by her choice. When she finally reappeared on The View, the tension was palpable. "I'm not going to apologize for being passionate," Joy said, her voice steadier than it had been during the clash. "But I will say this, when emotions run high, sometimes we don't show our best selves. I care about affordable medicine just as much as anyone. I just don't believe easy answers solve hard problems." The audience gave polite applause, but it lacked the thunderous energy of Mark's moments. It was clear her walk-off had left a scar. In Washington, lawmakers seized on the viral moment. A bipartisan group referenced the clash during a press conference about drug price reform. "If Mark Wahlberg and Joy Behar can nearly come to blows over this, maybe it's time Congress finally does something," one senator joked. Talk radio, podcasts, and late-night comedians all weighed in. Jimmy Fallon quipped, "Joy walked off faster than drug prices go up," while Trevor Noah praised Mark's raw authenticity. But beneath the humor, something deeper was happening. For the first time in years, the conversation about prescription drug caps wasn't buried in policy papers or congressional hearings. It was front and center in American living rooms. Months later, when people thought back to the episode, they didn't remember the guest lineup or the day's hot topics. They remembered that moment. The image of Joy pushing her chair back, lips tight with anger. The sound of the audience roaring as Mark's words cut through the studio. The sight of an empty chair on live television. It became a cultural shorthand, a reference point for when debates stopped being abstract and started feeling like life and death. For Mark, the legacy was clear. He had entered the studio as a movie star, a guest promoting his projects. He left as something more, a voice that forced millions to confront a broken system. His words outlived the headlines, echoing in the hearts of families across the country. And for Joy, the legacy was more complicated. Some fans defended her, saying she was ambushed by a Hollywood heavyweight. Others argued she had revealed a disconnect, too quick to dismiss, too unwilling to listen. The walk-off haunted her, a reminder of how quickly control can slip in live TV. In the end, the clash wasn't just about drug prices. It was about dignity, about the frustration of ordinary people who feel unseen, unheard, and left behind by those in power. And that's why it stuck, because it wasn't scripted, it wasn't polished, it was raw, human, and unforgettable. Mark Wahlberg versus Joy Behar had started as a debate over law and policy, but it ended as something bigger, a flashpoint in America's ongoing fight for fairness, care, and compassion. And no matter where you stood on the issue, one thing was undeniable. This wasn't just another TV argument. It was history in the making.